Hmm. Guys, I gotta ask you something. Did that just happen? Did we just watch the New York Mets win a baseball game? And not only did they win a baseball game, but they won 2 games in a row. That means that's a winning streak. And not only are they on a winning streak right now, but they just won a series. I guess miracles do happen. Now listen, I'm not so much of a believer in powers of the above, but hey, I'll take it. I'll take it. The New York Mets win a series, and not only win a series, but they win a series against one of the better teams in baseball in the Seattle Mariners, who, as you guys all know, had a big trade deadline, especially with acquiring guys like Eugenio Suarez and Josh Naylor. And they have been one of the better teams post trade deadline in the American League. And the Mets went in there, they did their job, took 2 out of 3, won a series. Look, is it still a little more disappointing considering the fact that when you really look at the series and the way how game one went down with the way the bullpen imploded? Because really, when you look at it, like I just said, the Mets kind of should have swept this series. But, you know, I guess with the way this team is playing so far and with the way how much they've slumped, especially over the past 2.5 months, when you look at these, 2 really long losing streaks that this team has had, the Mets are right now in a position where they have to get back on track and win as many ball games as they can to, not only cut down on the Phillies lead, but to also extend their lead over the Cincinnati Reds that because the gap between those two teams have just gotten way close. But anyway, guys, now that I got done with my little, beginning, rant here, for the post game stream, welcome back everybody to Mets Central. This is Mets fan reaction game 124, where, like I mentioned in the beginning of the show, the New York Mets defeat the Seattle Mariners by a final score of 7-3, and they win the series. They win the series. So, look, overall for me, was it still the best game of baseball I've seen the Mets play this year? No, and really that's not saying much because really when we look at it, there hasn't been a long stretch where this Mets team has played fantastic baseball, but considering what we've been watching over the past 2.5 months, like to talk about with the 2 really bad losing stretches, this was arguably one of their better games. They were a bit better with runners in scoring position, 5 for 15. Do you still want that to be a little bit higher? Sure, but it's been better than what they've been showing over the past couple weeks. Starting pitching wise, look, I know we get on Clay Holmes a lot for the fact that he hasn't been great over these last 2 months, and the fact that he has to give this Mets rotation a bit more length in terms of his starts. Still didn't give the length that you would want to see because he still only went 5 innings. But I thought Clay Holmes' start looked a little bit more sharper, and I'll dive in on that topic a little more as we get into the post game show. Um, Look, defensively was decent. Obviously, you had that really bad misplay by Francisco Lindor in the 4th inning, which could have led to an implosion from Clay Holmes in the 4th inning. But thankfully, he was able to work around that bad error by Lindor, even though it wasn't technically an error. But really, when you look at Lindor and the caliber of player he is, he should be making that play. But we'll get on to more of that as we break down the game. And then overall, the bullpen. Listen, bullpen was better. Still not where we want it to be, but definitely has looked a lot better in this game. Look, Tyler Rogers got into a little bit of trouble in the last inning, but he was able to get 3 outs. Brooks Raley had a solid out of the bullpen. He gave you 3 outs and he gave you a quality inning of work. Ryan Helsley came out of the bullpen, and we all know how badly Ryan Helsley has struggled since he has been acquired by the New York Mets from the St. Louis Cardinals. Still wasn't a great outing from Helsley today. He did throw a lot of pitches. Definitely when I was watching it, it did remind me a lot of a Stanek type outing where, he was chucking high velocity, he was chucking high heat, he was, mixing his slider here too or his cutter, depending, how you want to classify the pitch, and just couldn't get the swing and miss stuff that we expect from Ryan Helsley, considering, like I said, the fact that the guy can top out at 102, 103 consistently, but a bit better from Ryan Helsley, and he was able to get out of that jam. And also Reed Garrett comes in, gives up the 2-run home run to Cal Raleigh. Look, do you want to see better from Reed Garrett? Yes, but when you look at that pitch location that he threw to Cal Raleigh, it was a splitter, a low and away. Sometimes you just have to give credit to the hitter. Cal Raleigh is one of the better hitters in baseball, especially this year. Has I think he has 47, 48 home runs currently right now, on pace for over 60 home runs. So credit to Cal Raleigh. Good hitting by him. Went down there in the zone and just took the pitch out the opposite field, and ended up hitting a 2-run home run to cut the lead down to 7-3. But overall, like I mentioned, a lot better from the Mets. Still need to clean some stuff up, and also this is something that we've talked about. If you guys recall back to the end of June, after the Mets split that series against the Atlanta Braves at Citi Field, we said that, okay, you had a decent series, you had a nice bounce back series, but now you have to build off of this, because it doesn't matter, because like what we saw in June, Mets swept that not swept, but they tied the series against Atlanta. They split it 2 apiece, and then they went to Pittsburgh and they got swept. So, and then when you look at this situation, they win this series against the Seattle Mariners, one of the better teams in the American League this year. And now they go down. They have an off day tomorrow, which is good. Get some nice little rest. And now after this series, you go down to Washington, D.C., and you're playing against one of the worst teams in Major League Baseball this year, and the Washington Nationals. Do they have some young talent? Yes. But overall, when you compare the teams side by side, the New York Mets are the better team. The New York Mets are the more desperate team right now, because as I talked about, they have to rack up more wins now to not only cut the lead behind them from the Phillies, but also increase their lead in front of the Cincinnati Reds. So listen, you go in there, and again, I'm not asking for a sweep in Washington, but if you can go in there, win a series, and then head to Atlanta, which we all know that's a house of horrors for them. If you could go in there and again win a series, and all of a sudden now you're looking, and now all of a sudden you're looking to the future where the Mets win 3 series in a row. They at that point they would be 6-3 in their last 9. You could start to say, okay, maybe this Mets team is starting to get a little bit more back on track. But we're still getting a bit more. We're still getting way ahead of ourselves here. Good, they won the series, but you got to go down to Washington. You got to take care of business. That's it. But guys, let me just, before we go to your guys and read you guys' comments, let me just break down the game really quickly for you guys. As I mentioned before, for the Mets, Clay Holmes was on the mound, and on the mound for the Seattle Mariners, it was George Kirby. So leading off of the game, you have Randy Arozarena, and not the great start by Clay Holmes. Ends up hitting Randy Arozarena on the first pitch of the game. Sinker just got a little bit too high and ends up hitting him. So Arozarena ends up going to first base. Thankfully, Clay was able to bolt down and get out of that inning without any damage being done against him. He gets Cal Raleigh strikeout, and then gets J-Rod to ground into an inning double play. Bottom of the first, Francisco Lindor would lead off the inning with a single. Unfortunately, though, he would be picked off, as he just got caught in between the bags of first and second. Lindor's got to be a little bit smarter and a little bit better there. Juan Soto then grounds out, and then Brandon Nimmo grounds out to end that inning. We then move on to the top of the second. Good inning here by Clay Holmes. Gets Josh Naylor to pop out. Eugenio Suarez hits a single. But then Jorge Polanco flies out, and Dominic Quezon grounds out. We move on to the bottom of the second. Mets would finally get some runs here, as Pete Alonso would hit a leadoff single, followed them by Jeff McNeil single. So first and second, no outs. And then Francisco Alvarez, who we'll talk about a little bit more. We'll talk about him a little bit more as we get to the end of the game. But he ends up hitting a double to center field. Really, when you look at it, that's a ball that Julio Rodriguez should catch, but, good job by Francisco Alvarez. Takes the ball deep into the outfield, puts it a little bit into the gap, and, just puts it a little bit out of the reach of Julio Rodriguez. So he ends up hitting a double. He ends up going to second base. McNeil ends up going to third, and Pete Alonso would round the bases to put the Mets up 1-0. Brett Beatty would then hit a single, so the Mets will go up 2-0. And then good hitting here by Mark Vientos. He doesn't try to do too much. Hits its sacrifice fly to deep center field. Ends up putting the Mets up by a score of 3-0. Cedric Mullins strikes out, and then Francisco Lindor would hit into a force out to end that inning. Top of the third, another solid inning here by Clay Holmes. J.P. Crawford leads off the inning with a single. Cole Young would ground into a force out. Randy Arozarena would strike out, and then Cal Raleigh would fly out to end the inning. We then move on to the bottom of the third. A leadoff walk here by Juan Soto. Brandon Nimmo would end out striking out. Pete Alonso would then walk. Jeff McNeil flies out, and then Francisco Alvarez would hit into a force out to get out of the inning. So Mets could not extend their lead there. We then move on to the top of the fourth, and again, this is the inning where I talked about where, things could have got quickly out of hand for Clay Holmes, because Julio Rodriguez ends up hitting a leadoff double into right field. Josh Naylor strikes out. Then Eugenio's grounds out. Julio Rodriguez moves over to third base on that play. Oh no, he stays at second base of that play. Sorry guys, sorry for my mistake. And then Jorge Polanco hits a ball up the middle. And listen, is it a play? And like I said, it's a play where Francisco Lindor should make. Does he have to, jump up a little bit to make that play? Yes, but realistically, like I said, for the amount of money Francisco Lindor is being paid, and for the quote unquote leadership role that he has on that team, he needs to be able to make that play. It just goes over his glove. Polanco ends up hitting a single. Rodriguez ends up coming around to score, and then the Mariners would end up cutting the lead down to 3-1. Dominic Canzone would then hit a single. J.P. Crawford would then walk to load up the bases, but thankfully Clay Holmes would make the pitch out of the inning as he gets Clay Holmes to pop. He gets Cole Young to pop out. But this is one of the things where, and listen, I know Clay Holmes exactly hasn't been the greatest. He hasn't exactly had the greatest last couple months, but a lot of times when you watch Clay Holmes' starts, he does sometimes get screwed over by just some dumb defensive mishaps by the Mets. We saw it in San Diego. Lindor should have made an easy play to get out of the inning. Ended up being an error. Padres would end up tacking on a couple runs, and then thankfully here, like I said, Lindor should be able to make that play, but doesn't. And they only scored the one run, but thankfully, like I said, Holmes is able to get out of that inning. We move on to the bottom of the fourth. Brett Beatty would hit into a ground out. Mark Vientos single. Cedric Mullins strikes out. Francisco Lindor would single. Juan Soto would walk. And then Brandon Nimmo would line out to get out of that inning. Top of the fifth, quick 1-2-3 inning here by Clay Holmes. And that will be his final inning of work. We move on to the bottom of the fifth. Pete Alonso strikes out. Jeff McNeil hits a single. Francisco Alvarez singles. Brett Beatty would then fly out to Randy Arozarena in left field. So 2 outs, men on first and second. Doesn't look like the Mets are going to do any damage here. But then Mark Vientos, who has struggled this year, steps up to the plate and then ends up hitting an opposite home run to right field to put the Mets up 6-1. So a nice hit there by Mark Vientos and a nice, maybe a little bit of confidence booster, because going down the stretch, the Mets are going to need as many hot bats as possible. And if you could get Mark Vientos' bat going, that's more, quality and more back-end damage that this lineup potentially needs. So very nice home run there by Mark Vientos. Cedric Mullins would then hit a double. Francisco Lindor would then hit a double to put the Mets up 7-1. There will be a pitching change here by the Mariners as Taylor Saquedo will come in to replace George Kirby, and then Juan Soto hits into a ground out. And listen, I know me and Evan, we both criticized the Mets offense here a lot on the podcast and on the post-game show, but one of our biggest complaints about this Mets offense, and it's something, that we really, talk about a lot on here, is whenever the Mets come up against really good pitchers, they tend to struggle. And then when they have those opposing pitchers on the ropes, they aren't able to put those opposing pitchers away. But thankfully, they faced George Kirby. And look, George Kirby wasn't exactly sharp today. He didn't have the sharpest stuff, didn't have the greatest command of the strike zone, did end up walking a couple guys, was giving up some hard contact. But like we've been talking about, this should be one of the better lineups in baseball. And when you look at, money wise and how much this lineup is paid, this lineup should be doing damage against these top end starting pitchers. And thankfully, against George Kirby, they were able to do it. But like me and Evan always say, we're not going to get too excited because, when they have these games where they hit well against these better starting pitchers, these are more the outliers than they are more of, like the, how should I say this? They're more of outliers than more they are normal. So, like I said, we're not going to get too excited, but I'll give credit where credit is due. You got to give credit to the offense here in this game. We then move on to the top of the second. Brooks Raley comes in to replace Clay Holmes. Oh, and also before we get to that and we continue on this post game show, just going to flash up Clay Holmes' final pitching line. 5 innings pitch. So again, decent start, but you do want to see a little bit more length out of Clay Holmes. 5 hits, 1 run, 1 earned run, 1 walk, 4 Ks, 0 home runs. That lowers his ERA down to 3.64. And this was one of the main things that I wanted to bring up to you guys about Clay Holmes, because if you guys recall in the podcast, we talked about how, one of the biggest reasons why Clay Holmes has really struggled over these past couple months is not only because he's kind of hit of a wall in terms of fatigue, which was to be expected since, he is converting from reliever to starter, but we talked about how one of the biggest issues that Clay Holmes has had is the fact that he's just not using enough of his arsenal, and that, he's relying way too much on the sinker, and, and he's not using the kick change enough. He's not using the cutter enough. He's not using the sweeper enough. He's not using the fastball enough. Well, today, when you compare this start to the last start against the Braves that Clay Holmes had, when you just look at his pitch selection that he had, you compare the sinker usage in this game compared to the Braves game and this game, threw it 28 times. In the Braves game, 58 times. The kick change, 18 times compared to 11 times in the Brave start. And then the slider sweeper, you combine it because it classifies two different pitches here, but through that pitch 33 times, and then when you compare it to the Brave start, he only threw it 25 times. Still would have liked to see the fastball usage a little bit more on the cutter, and the cutter usage a little bit more, but this is what Clay Holmes has to do, because like I mentioned, Holmes has good stuff. He just has to utilize more of his arsenal, so he's not too predictable. Because that's one of the main things I also brought up on the podcast. It's like when you're a reliever, you can be a bit more predictable because you're only facing the lineup, not even once you're on the order. If you really have to be pushed, you're only facing really 6 to 7 batters, considering how many hits you give up, or how many times you walk opposing batters. But as a starting pitcher, when you're facing the order, multiple times, and especially when you go through the order a second time and then the third time, if you're only throwing 1 to 2 pitches, these lineups, especially one of the more talented lineups in baseball, they're going to pick up on your tendencies, and they're going to sit and they know that if you're throwing cutter or if you're throwing sinker most of the time, they're just going to end up sitting on the sinker. And then when they know that pitch is coming, they're just going to sit on it and wait to damage on it. So a little bit more encouraging stuff that the Mets, or that Clay Holmes ended up using more of his arsenal, in this start. And listen, this is something that that he has to keep doing, because like I said, we know that Clay Holmes has the stuff. We know he is a good pitcher. It's just using a little bit more of that arsenal, and hopefully going deeper into games. But overall, solid start from Clay Holmes, and that's something that we need to see more of. But guys, we continue on this post game show. We move on to the top of the sixth. Brooks Raley comes in to replace Clay Holmes, gets Josh Naylor to ground out, gets Eugenio Suarez to strike out. Jorge Polanco would hit a double. Dominic Canzone would then walk, but thankfully Raley was able to get out of that inning as he gets J.P. Crawford to line out. We then move on to the bottom of the sixth. 1, 2, 3 inning here as the Mets couldn't get anything going that inning. We then move on to the top of the seventh. Reed Garrett comes in to replace Brooks Raley, gets Cole Young to ground out. Randy Arozarena ends up hitting a single. Then I mentioned Cal Raleigh ends up hitting that sinker out to left field to hit a 2-run home run to cut the Mets lead down to 7-3. But thankfully, Garrett was able to get out of the inning as he gets Julio Rodriguez to strike out and Josh Naylor to pop out. Move on to the bottom of the seventh. Francisco Alvarez would then hit a double, but then a little bit of an injury scare here as Alvarez went to slide into second base, he ends up jamming his thumb on the second base bag, and he had to come out of the game. Hopefully, there's not too much damage, and we know that's a little bit of a scare, because if you guys look back at the last 2 years, Alvarez has done damage to that thumb specifically on his right hand. So hopefully, it's just a bad bruise or a bad sprain, and hopefully it's nothing too serious. And hopefully he'll be back in the lineup when the Mets go down to Washington. But a little bit of a scare there, but Brett Beatty ends up striking out. Mark Vientos grounds out, and then Cedric Mullins flies out. We then move on to the top of the eighth. Ryan Helsley comes in to replace Reed Garrett, gets a Suarez to strike out, gets Polanco to strike out, gets Dominic Canzone, then walks, and then J.P. Crawford grounds out. We then move on to the bottom of the eighth. Jackson Coher comes in to replace Sequedo. Lindor strikes out. Juan Soto walks. He ends up stealing second base. So that will be Soto's 20th stolen base of the year. Nimmo then singles. Pete Alonso strikes out, and then Jeff McNeil grounds out. And then we go to the top of the ninth. Tyler Rogers comes in to finish off this game, gets Cole Young to pop out. Randy Arozarena pops out. A little bit of trouble then here for Rogers as Cal Raleigh singles, Julio Rodriguez singles, but thankfully no damage will be done as the very next pitch, he will get Josh Naylor to ground out to end the game. So, like I said, Mets win 7-3, win this series. Good little win. And also, you had the game today, which was, a nice little event. You had it in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. They had the annual Little League game. So, nice little event there for Major League Baseball. And like I said, good win for the Mets. But now as they head to Washington, you simply just got to build momentum off this one, because if you go down to Washington and let's say you lose this series, or even, worst case scenario, you get swept in that series, all the good work that you've done in the series gets erased. So, like I said, bit better, but still need to improve upon some stuff, and just like I said, just get momentum back on your side, and hopefully we'll see what happens for the rest of the year. But anyway, guys, before I get out of here, just gonna go through your guys' comments really quickly, and then we'll get out of here, and then we'll have a podcast tomorrow. As always, we'll break down the series, and as of always, Make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe on the channel. We always appreciate you guys' support here on the channel. And also make sure to hit the notification bell as well to let you guys know anytime we upload a video or go live here on the channel. But let's see what we have here. Ray, what is going on? Vientos was in 2024 playoff mode. The swag was back. Absolutely. Vientos had a very good game. And hopefully we get some semblance of 2024 Vientos back. Listen, I'm not expecting to get that type of Vientos back, but if they could just get some sort of better version of Vientos than they've gotten over this past year, would be a nice little help, especially to the back end of the lineup. Ray, 2 games in a row is a streak for them. Low. Hey, listen, when you're playing as bad as they've been over these last couple months, two winning 2 games, it's like an accomplishment. So, but listen, at this point, just baby steps. Play better, win a couple more games, and then we'll see what happens from there. D-Rails 93. Ray, what is going on? My boy Swaggy V is back. Hopefully. Listen, I'm not going to get too carried away because at the end of the day, we've seen Vientos have these nice little streaks here and there, as we recall back to the Kansas City series where he was arguably, the best bat in that series. And then, we saw him, take a couple, a dip in form, had the nice little series in San Diego right before the trade deadline. And then, he ended up dipping in form again. So I want to see a little bit more consistency from Vientos before I fully say it's like, okay, we maybe have something from Vientos, but we all know the talent is there. It's just whether he can put whether he can put stuff together. Winning streak, Bay, the kids change the culture. Culture changes, baby. Pablo, what is going on? Nice to see Vientos doing better. Would love to see him more in the DH role. I mean, yeah. Listen, look, with Marte playing most of the time in the DH role, and he has been decent over these last couple months. Obviously they're gonna want to get Marte into to get some playing time there. But listen, obviously we don't love Vientos' glove there at third base. So yeah, listen, if he's gonna start to hit better, and especially like this, and now you could put that bat in the DH role, then by all means. But like I said before, he has to show this more consistently before we fully get bought in on the Vientos hype. Pantries, what's going on? All right, awesome. We finally we won a series finally. Now let's win 2 series in a row so I can start believing again. And listen, like I said, we would all love to see that. But again, baby steps. Just go into Washington and take care of business there before we go in there and we focus on Atlanta, because even then they're going to Atlanta this time, and we all know how much of a house of horrors Atlanta is for this Mets franchise. So, but take it one step at a time. Eric Wallace, congrats on beating my guys, folks. Oh, Eric, I guess you are a Mariners fan. Thank you. You guys have a very good team, and yeah, I would not be shocked if you guys end up making a deep run, in the playoffs, considering how deep of a lineup you guys do have, and your bullpen's solid, and you have one of the better starting rotations in baseball. But thanks a lot for the credit, Eric. Exactly, Prantries. They got my attention. Now earn my trust. I still wouldn't say they have my attention fully, but I liked a bit more from what I saw, and especially like I forgot who brought it up here, but even Ray talked about maybe McLean and his start that he had that he had yesterday in his debut. Maybe that doesn't inspire the team. Who knows? Listen, McLean pitched well. Obviously, he earned the spot on this team, and he's going to keep on making starts. So hopefully, hopefully that's the spark that this team needs. But we'll of course we have to end up seeing, and this team has to win more ball games before they they exactly earn my attention back and earn my trust. That kid came up and dealt in his first major league game and competed. That inspires. Absolutely. Hopefully we see that more. And McLean has more action on his pitches than Harvey did, but it's only a 1-game sample size. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, like I said, it is a 1-game sample size, but McLean has some nasty stuff, especially that sweeper that he has. The amount of movement he has on that sweeper, and the amount of what's it called, the amount of rotations he has on that sweeper. It's a nasty pitch. Listen, McLean is good stuff, and listen, I don't want to put too much pressure on the kid because McLean, especially going into this year, he shouldn't have ever been the savior. And listen, I don't want to put that much pressure on the kid, but listen, if he could just keep on doing what he's doing and go out there every 5 days and give you quality starts, you'll gladly take that from Noel McLean. And as Ray said, maybe that's the inspiration this team needs. But listen, we'll see. Right again, Soto and Lindor both with 20 stolen bases. Yup, love to see it. Again, that's the coaching of Antoine Richardson. And as we always say on here, coaching matters, and Antoine Richardson has done a very good, job with these guys in terms of running the bases and stealing bases. So yeah, he's done a very good job. And his coaching has really rubbed off on these guys in terms of the stolen bases because, I don't think any of us, obviously with Lindor, we expect him to steal bases, but I don't think any of us going into the season, thought that Juan Soto would be a 20 stolen base guy. I mean, I believe last year with the Yankees, he only stole 11 bases. So considering that, he's already up to 20, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. D-Rolls, great stream, bro. Thank you a lot. Peace, y'all. Peace, y'all later, Ray. Yup, peace, D-Rolls. Okay, and then Hornet Wags, good to win. However, late inning scoring teams late inning scoring seems to be an issue. Yeah, that is something that we've talked about plenty of times here on the podcast and plenty on the post game shows that we have done. The Mets a lot of the times, especially this offense, and it's been a trend this year. They're bunch scorers where there'll be one or two innings where they end up scoring a lot of runs, and then the rest of the game, the offense just seems to disappear. And yeah, I mean, when you look at the games, especially over the last month or in the last month and a half or so, scoring later in the games has been an issue for this team, but they that's something they need to improve on because during the postseason, there's going to be times where you might be down in the game, and you're going to need your offense to have a couple rallies later in games, and if you're not going to be able to do that, then you're going to lose games and you're simply going to be eliminated. So that's something they need to improve on. They certainly have the talent wise in terms of being able to put together rallies. It's just whether they can do it on a consistent basis. Because we've seen them, they can do it in one off. We've seen them have games where they put up 10, 11 runs, and even in this game, 7 runs. But it's more of a consistency issue, and that's one of the reasons why, like me and Evan, we say it's cool when they have these high scoring games, but we really can't be too excited because we know that most likely that's not going to carry over into the next game and then the next game after that. So, but listen, if they start to show consistency and they're able, to have more high scoring games collectively, then listen, we'll obviously believe more in this team, but that's something that we have to see it to believe it. But hopefully they can turn that around. Thank you for the show, LFGM. No problem, Ray. Always appreciate support here. Hopefully they go on a run now with the playoff bracket. Nowadays, you basically just need a pulse and you're in. Yeah, listen, I get that. I get that. And we've seen plenty of teams, where they make the wild card. Obviously, you look at 2022 with the Philadelphia Phillies, they snuck in as a wild card team, ended up going to the World Series. You look at 2023 where both the Texas Rangers and the Arizona Diamondbacks, the teams that ended up, representing both leagues respectively in the World Series, they were both wild card teams. So listen, it is a case where, just get in, but because this is something that I've seen people, especially in the fan base talk about, where it's like, oh, this Mets team has a talent to, if they just get in, go on a run. And from names wise, yes, but in terms of how they play, I can't fully agree with that. Just because, listen, the postseason, it's a 2 to 3 week month stretch of high volume baseball, and your offense has to be consistent enough to where you can put up on the fronts to win games because your pitching staff has to do a really good job of holding off other really good lineups, but you have to be putting up runs consistently. And we've seen this offense where okay, maybe there'll be a game or two where they put up a lot of runs, but then we've seen them go on these cold stretches of 2 to 3 weeks, and if that happens in the playoffs, you're gonna be eliminated. So listen, do they have talent in terms of names to make a run? Sure, but I don't look at the way that this team plays baseball, and I can't come to the conclusion and say, okay, if they just get in, they'll be able to go on a run. Listen, if they prove me wrong, they prove me wrong, cool. Because and listen, first of all, they have to get to the playoffs, first of all, and that's not even guaranteed right now because they put themselves in a tough position right now with the amount of games that they've lost over the past 2.5 months. So, but listen, I know it's late, it's middle of August, but if they could maybe flip a switch somehow and start to play better baseball, then listen, my opinion may change and most likely it will change. But I have to see evidence. I need to see consistency before I can say, okay, this team is capable of going on a run because, we've just saw over the past 2.5 months where this team has shown plenty of evidence to show that they are not a World Series team. But listen, if they want to turn around and start playing better baseball, like they did in, in this game specifically, then cool. I'm not going to complain. But like I said, but like I said, like what me and like what Evan has said over the past couple weeks as well, we have to see it to believe it. But anyway, guys, that's gonna be it. That's gonna be it for me here. As always, expect the podcast tomorrow, probably around 2 o'clock, which is the usual time we do it. Obviously, we'll break down this series and we'll go over the series, and then we'll preview the upcoming 3 game set against the Washington Nationals. And as always, guys, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe on the channel. We always appreciate you guys' support here on Met Central, and also make sure to hit the notification bell as well to let you guys know anytime we upload a video or go live on the channel. And just before we get out of here, we'll read one more comment. I agree. I meant to go on a rundown. Hopefully, keep it going in. Yep, absolutely. Fully understand that. But anyway, guys, that's gonna be it for me. Like I said, expect the podcast tomorrow around 2 o'clock. And yeah, that's gonna be it for me, guys. See you guys tomorrow. Peace. Let's go, Mets, baby.